Okay, in this video we are going to talk about the schemas in much more little bit more detail. I have already shown to you how to create a schema using a graphical user interface, that is GUI. Okay, now actually you can use it. You can create a schema using a transact SQL, but in this, before going to the creating the schema, I'm just going to explain it to you how really the schema actually exists in the database. Okay, under the server, once you are in the logged in, you can see that there is a database. Okay, there are various databases into it, and when you go to the database, what happens is, as you can see here, there are users, there are roles in the database. If you go to the security part of it, you will find that there are users, there are roles. Okay, now remember, there can be more than one schema on your database. Okay, now these users actually are in the schemas. Roles are actually into the schemas. What it means is that I can create a schema, okay, and under the schema I can create a lot of objects. Okay, what objects I can create in the schema are known as schema securables. Now let's go and see it, what objects I can create in the schema. Okay, these are the following actually securables. Okay, the word securable has been dimmed, okay, because it is the white. Okay, the following are securable types: XML schema collection, objects, aggregates, constant functions, procedures, queues, statistics, and tables, views, terms. Okay, now the main thing is, these objects actually belong to the schema. And why do we need a schema? In a SQL 2000 there was no concept of a schema. Okay, what used to happen was that if the user a different user would create objects, and that objects would belong to the different users. Now once the user left the organization, it was very difficult for them actually to move the objects from that user, okay, to a different user. Okay, so Microsoft came up with the concept completely that all the objects would from now on, from the SQL 2005, would belong to the schema, and a user would be actually in the schema. What does it mean? That suppose if I actually created 10 different objects, okay, I created in the schema, then I can assign a user to that schema. I can remove that user to the schema. So I can assign a role also to the schema. What happens was that actually this would actually clear off that a user owning the object. I can always remove the user from the schema and put a new user into the schema. So the user was not that important now. The schema became more important. If you do not specify any schema by default, okay, so the object would be created under DBO schema, that is a database owner. Usually you have to first create a schema, and then only you can actually go and create, and then only you should go and create the objects into the schema. Okay, now it is not necessary that you have only one schema. You can have multiple schemas specified to a single schema itself. A user and role may actually go to the different schemas. As you can see here, this user also can belong to schema 1, again it can belong to schema 2, okay, and the roles also similarly. Now same way here it is. Okay, I have tried to actually show it to you by the arrow actually what is happening. Okay, now the user belongs to the group. As you can see, user 1, user 2, user 3 are belonging to the group. Okay, 3, and so on and so forth. And the group is belonging to schema. You are getting it? Users 1, user 2, user 3 are getting into the groups. Okay, now the group is being actually gets to the schema. and I can remove a user from a group, or I can remove completely a group and assign a new group to a schema, no problem at all. Okay, so far so good. Now let's get to the SQL Server. Okay, you can specify, you can apply a security at the schema level. This means that the object within the schema can be managed as a unit instead of at the individual object level. Now if you specify the schema for the database object, that means all the objects will be created in the default schema. Now remember that thing. Now let's go and actually create a schema using a transact SQL, TSQL, or transact SQL, okay, whatever you want to call it. Now I am going to use the test database because we are actually trying to experiment. So we should actually always you try to create a database that is actually a temp or a test database wherever we want to experiment. Do not experiment on your production data or your data. You use it for a regular good any important task. Okay, here it is. I have executed and I have said select test, and I am going to create a schema payroll to and authorized by the DB owner. Okay. Now I have created a schema. As you can see, it is already created. I can go to the test management. Oh, sorry. I can go to the security. Security in the test database. And if you go to the security in the test database, you will find that there are schema. Okay, when I created a schema, okay, it will exist in the test database because I created it under a test. And as you can see, there was a payroll 2. I already created a payroll already, so I just created a payroll 2 this time to show you. Now schema is a logical object, it is not a physical object, remember that thing. And now actually I can put the physical objects that belongs to the schema, that are schema securables, under the schema payroll 2. Okay, now let's go and do it. Here is a one table. I want to create it. Okay, I have already specified create table payroll 2. Okay, that is schema name, employee name. Okay, and I'm going to execute it. And as you can see, the table I have created, employee, actually should exist under the tables under the schema payroll 2. As you can see, payroll 2, you can see the employee, the schema is actually the payroll 2, and the employee is created under that thing, the table. As you can see, there are other tables where the schema was not specified. The DBO has become the default schema for those. Okay, and there this one is for demo schema. Okay, now let's go to the little bit further. Now let's go and create a login name Mona and give it merry-go-round. Okay, here it is. I'm going to execute this syntax SQL to create a login. I hope there is no login for the name Mona, otherwise it will give you an error. There wasn't any login. Okay, so we have created a login named as Mona. Okay, now let's go to the user test and say user test create user Mona for the login Mona. Okay, now we are trying to create a user from the login. Actually we created a login that was Mona, and we are going to create a user from that login itself. Okay, as you will see that the login has been created. If I want, I can go and check it in the test database for the login. Here it is, the user login of Mona has been created, and of course the login would be in the security of the SQL server, and there we can find it. and there it is. Okay, the Mona has been actually, there is a login for the, because login is always created under the server, not under the database. User is under created always under the database. Now let's go actually create a, assign a default schema to the user Mona. We just created a schema known as payroll 2, and I'm going to assign it to the default. I'm going to make this schema the default schema for the Mona user. Okay, I'm just going to say alter user Mona but default schema payroll 2, and I'm going to execute it. Okay, and there we are. The schema has been entered. Okay, now the Mona has a Mona default schema is a payroll 2. Okay, now let's go and check it out. The schema names and other things. Okay, here it is. As you can see, all the schema name are listed, which means the schema name I also created right now, payroll 2, is also been listed here. Okay, this is the SQL syntax that allows me to actually get the information for the schema and the schema owner. Owner I created with the authorization of DB owner, so it's actually DB owner, database owner. So far so good. Now suppose if I wanted actually to change the object, the schema of the schema owner to DBO from payroll 2, what I am going to do is I am going to alter the schema DBO and transfer payroll to the payroll 2 employee table to the schema DBO. What is happening is, from the schema payroll 2 I am transferring the employee table to the schema DBO, and then once I transfer all the objects from the schema payroll 2 to the other schema, I can drop the schema payroll 2. Okay, so before dropping the schema you have to transfer those objects. Here it is. Okay, now if I go and run this, okay, it says already exists. Okay, maybe it already exists, so it cannot actually transfer. Hold on. Okay, now let's go and execute it once more and just see, let's see what happens. Okay, here we go, and I have executed the schema, and now it has created one, because that was left over from the previous exercise that I was doing. And so this is again actually it has created, and now it is actually, if you see, refresh the tables and see it, you will see that the schema has been transferred from payroll 2 to DBO 2. Okay, here it is, employee has been transferred from payroll to DBO. Now I can drop the schema payroll, because there is no object into the schema. I can always drop the schema right now, and it should not give a error. There it is. So far so good. Now I can actually use the auto authorization on schema to the human resources. This is all giving the permissions and other things. Okay, now basically what the schema was, actually you have seen how it is to be created, and I already shown it to you with the SQL Server Management Studio, and I will just end it here. Okay.